continuing the series where we compile the illustrious list of worst performing cabinet ministers of the country that held few of the most important job profiles. This time we have circled around the Foreign Affairs Ministry or the External Affairs Ministry. The Videsh Mantri, as we like to call them, has the paramount duty of establishing and determining India's foreign policy concerning other nations. However, over the course of the last 75 years, India has had the misfortune of having few non-performing ministers leading the all-important portfolio. A momentary blip in the performance of the ministry can set a nation back by decades. Hi and welcome. This is TFI English, the national socio-political analysis arm of the TFI Media Group. I'm Siddharth, your host. And in this video, I will tell you about the top 5 worst foreign ministers India has ever had. Let's begin. Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first Prime Minister and for inexplicable reasons referred to as Chacha Nehru, held the all-important Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 1946 to 1964. He remains the country's longest-serving foreign minister and possibly the worst candidate to ever have graced the spot. It is not an overstatement to say that Jawaharlal Nehru during his tenure acted as a Chinese agent in control of the Indian government. Jawaharlal Nehru's tenure was marked by one disaster after another concerning China and Pakistan. The man practically ceded all Indian advantages to the Chinese, as well as our northwestern neighbors without any foresight. He described China as a great country and a friend of Indians, even while the Chinese communists led by Mao Zedong refused to reciprocate a similar sentiment. Jawaharlal Nehru's admiration of China continued well up to 1962, when the Red Rogue country mounted an all-out offensive on India's northern frontier. Even in 1954, when China squeezed India out of Tibet in the Panchsheel Agreement, Nehru called the 5 principles wholesome and erroneously described it as a very important event. The Kashmir blunder of 1947-48 is perhaps Chacha Nehru's biggest faux pas. Newly carved Pakistan was allowed to occupy a part of Kashmir even though Pakistani troops had been beaten black and blue. It was under Nehru that the country went to the UN to raise the Kashmir issue, and to this date, it is an albatross hanging around the neck of India. Nehru also failed to realize the strategic importance of Balochistan province and turned down an offer by the king or Khan of Kalat, Mir Ahmadiyar Khan, to accede to India. Today, Pakistan is occupying the Balochistan province, which forms 40% of Pakistan-administered territory, and China is using the Gwadar port for building presence and influence in the Indian Ocean region. Nehru's blunder of gifting Indian land to China and Pakistan have been well documented. But what slips under the radar is how he gifted away one of the tactically important Cocoa Islands to China through the Burmese government. As a result of that, the current Xi Jinping authoritarian regime has access to an island which by most estimates is used to spy on the Indian forces. Greater Cocoa has for long been known to be managed by the Chinese, which reports over 2 decades of signals intelligence facilities, maritime bases, a radar facility which is apparently all but confirmed, and as a general surveillance hub to keep tabs on Indian military activity. A military presence in the Cocoa Islands, if truly established, would give China the edge to monitor India's naval activities with other powers in the region. It will also affect other regional powers such as Australia and the USA and strengthen China's foothold in the Indian Ocean. Served the prime ministerial post in a golden platter, Rajiv Gandhi during his tenure as the Prime Minister frequently shuffled his cabinet ministers. The media described his charade as a wheel of confusion, where the ministers were transferred between different ministries willy-nilly. As many as 5 foreign ministers were inaugurated under Rajiv's tenure, with the supposed young prodigy himself holding the portfolio on 2 separate occasions, one in 1984 and another time in 1987. Late former External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj in 2015 had attributed the mysterious escape of Union Carbide chairman Warren Anderson from India after the December 2, 1984 gas tragedy in his chemical factory in Bhopal to a quid pro quo by the then Prime Minister and Foreign Affairs Minister Rajiv Gandhi to secure freedom to his childhood friend jailed in the USA for 35 years. Sushma Swaraj mentioned that Rajiv Gandhi was keen to secure the release of his friend's son Adil Shahryar, who was serving 35 years in a US jail. She quoted Arjun Singh's book, which claimed that Rajiv Gandhi had ordered him to make arrangements for Anderson's safe passage to the USA. Rajiv Gandhi was many things. He was Indira Gandhi's son, Sonia Gandhi's husband, and the father of Rahul Gandhi and Priyanka Vadra. He was a pilot and an alleged genocide enabler. He was also the country's prime minister. Above all, however, He was a scamster who also served as India's foreign minister and interpreted the name of the ministry literally. He helped a foreign fugitive individual escape India. After all, isn't this what the foreign ministry was set up for? In the biggest reshuffle in former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's cabinet since he assumed the power for the second time in 2009, Salman Khurshid was crowned the foreign minister in 2012. Khurshid, currently in the news for all the wrong reasons, had similarly become a monster in the public's eye for his undying fidelity for the Pakistanis and the Chinese. Khurshid disregarded rumblings from within his own government, as well as inflamed public opinion, as he hosted a sumptuous lunch for visiting Pakistan Prime Minister Raja Parvez Ashraf and his 50-member entourage at Jaipur's Rambagh Palace Hotel. The entire fiasco is known as the Biryani Gate. Khurshid, after a visit to China, started waxing lyrical about the country, showered with flowers at the Tiananmen Square, the place where democracy died. Khurshid became a Chinese poodle to the very core. Asked whether he would like to live in China, he replied in the affirmative, and only later added the caveat that not as the foreign minister. One of the founding members of the BJP, Swaran Singh has had an illustrious record in public service. However, the big blemish on his record came during the ICE 841 hijack in Kandahar, Afghanistan. Make no mistake, the incident is seen as a failure of the BJP government under Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee and IB chief Ajit Doval. However, being the foreign minister at the time, Swaran had to cope with some of the heat as well. On December 31, 1999, the then Vajpayee government had to release 3 dreaded terrorists, including Masood Azhar, from Indian captivity in order to secure the safe release of 176 Indian passengers of the hijacked aircraft. Popular sentiment and media narrative played an important role in forcing the then government to surrender to the demands of the hijackers that resulted in the release of Masood Azhar. The nation wanted forces to fight. At the same time, compatriots were not willing to make any sacrifices in the interest of the nation. Swaran Singh had gone to meet the families of the passengers who were held hostage by terrorists, where he was mobbed and, despite trying to explain the situation, failed miserably at it. Despite the distinctiveness of the situation, India and Swaran Singh could have handled the situation way better. Swaran Singh was a worthy orator who served in the ministry during the 1971 war. However, despite having mastery over his vocal crafts, he could not convince the USSR, a fast friend of India at the time, and the USA that his liberation plans for East Pakistan were sound. George H.W. Bush, who at the time was the US ambassador to the UN and led the US delegation at the UN Security Council, demanded an unconditional ceasefire by India, refusing to hear and accept Swaran's version. In the months preceding the war, the USSR's attitude towards the crisis in East Pakistan was on the whole ambivalent. The Soviet Union repeatedly stressed that it upheld the territorial integrity of Pakistan, and it carefully refrained from giving overt support to the insurgents. While the Soviet Union came around to the realization and provided India with the support it needed during the attacks, the fact that Swaran Singh could not convince them earlier was a blemish.